They abandoned the paralyzed alien girl. Only a human took her in and loved her. The mining colony on Epsilon Ridge was not a place for the weak, and everyone knew it, but nobody said it out loud, because saying it made them feel less civilized than they pretended to be. And the Velcoran people prided themselves on being civilized even when they were not. Zara had been strong once, and she remembered running across the red plains of her homeworld with her twin sister and laughing under 3 moons, but that was before the accident, before the tunnel collapsed, before her legs stopped working and her people stopped seeing her as one of them. She was 17 cycles old when they left her behind. The evacuation ships came when the colony started failing, when the ore ran dry and profits disappeared, and her family carried her to the loading dock in silence because what could they say to a daughter who had become a burden in a society that valued strength above all else? Her mother touched her face one last time, and her father would not meet her eyes, and her sister cried, but got on the ship anyway because that was what everyone did. And Zara watched the engines flare blue against the orange sky and felt nothing because she had known this was coming for months. They left her in the medical bay with 2 weeks of supplies and a broken hover chair that only moved forward, and she sat there in the empty building listening to the wind howl through the abandoned corridors, and thought about how quickly love could turn into logistics. 3 days passed and she ran out of water. The human found her on the 4th day, when she was too weak to even call for help anymore, and she heard his boots on the metal floor before. She saw him, and when he appeared in the doorway she thought she was hallucinating, because humans were not supposed to be on Epsilon Ridge. His name was Ben Carter, and he was a salvage contractor, and he stared at her for a long moment with those strange single-colored eyes that humans had, and she waited for him to leave like everyone else, but instead, he said something in his language and disappeared and came back with water. She drank, and he waited, and when she could speak again, she told him in broken standard tongue that he should go because she was already dead, and he laughed and said that was the dumbest thing he had ever heard, and she did not know whether to be offended or relieved. Ben was not like her people, and he did not ask why she was alone or where her family went because he seemed to understand without asking, and humans were strange that way, always understanding things they should not understand and feeling things they should not feel. He fixed her hover chair first, and it took him 6 hours, and he cursed a lot in his language, and she learned later that those were very bad words, but they sounded funny when he said them, and she almost smiled and realized she had not smiled in a very long time. The colony was dead, and there was nothing left worth salvaging. But Ben stayed anyway, and he moved her to his ship, which was small and cluttered and smelled like oil and something sweet she could not identify, and he made space for her in the cargo bay and brought her food and never once asked for anything in return. Days became weeks, and weeks became something else, and Zara learned that humans did not see strength the way her people did, and Ben never looked at her legs with pity or disgust, and he treated her like she was whole, and that was a gift she had not known existed. She learned his language slowly, and he learned hers, and they talked about everything and nothing, and he told her about Earth, and she told him about Velcora, and somewhere in those conversations she started to feel like a person again instead of a problem. Ben was fixing things that could not be fixed, because that was what he did, and one day he came back to the ship with parts he said might help, and he worked for days building something in the corner and would not tell her what it was, and when he finally showed her she could not breathe. It was a new mobility rig, and not a hover chair, but something better with mechanical legs that moved with her thoughts through a neural link, and he had built it from scraps and spare parts and his own stubbornness, and when she asked why he just shrugged and said, "Because you deserve to walk." Learning to use the rig was hard, and she fell a lot, and Ben caught her every time and never made her feel weak for falling, and slowly, painfully she learned to stand again and then to walk and then to run. And the first time she ran, she cried, and Ben pretended not to notice. They left Epsilon Ridge after that, because there was nothing left there but ghosts, and they traveled to other colonies, and Ben took salvage jobs, and Zara helped him and learned to repair things, and people stared at her sometimes, at the alien girl with metal legs, but Ben would stare back harder, and they would look away. Months passed and turned into a year, and Zara realized she had not thought about her family in weeks, and when she did think about them she felt nothing, and that was its own kind of freedom. She loved Ben, and she did, not know when it started or how it happened, but one day she looked at him while he was cursing at a broken engine and realized that he was her home, and homes were not supposed to be people, but maybe the best ones were. Telling him was terrifying, because humans and Velkorans did not do this, and cross-species relationships were not common. And what if he did not feel the same, and what if she ruined everything? But she told him anyway because he had taught her to be brave. Ben looked at her for a long time, and then he smiled, that slow, careful smile he had, and said he had been waiting for her to figure it out. Because he had known for months, and humans were apparently very bad at hiding their feelings. They kissed, and it was awkward, because their faces were different shapes and she had never kissed anyone before. But it was also perfect because it was them, and nothing had ever felt more right. Life was not easy because life never was, but it was good, and they worked together, and traveled together and built a life that belonged to neither of their worlds but to both. And Zara learned that family was not the people who shared your blood, but the people who chose to stay. Ben taught her that love was not about deserving or earning, and it was not about being strong enough or useful enough, and it was just about being. And that was revolutionary for someone who had been taught their whole life that existence had to be justified. Years passed, and they bought a bigger ship and hired a crew and started a real salvage business. And Zara became known in certain circles as the best repair specialist in 3 sectors, and people stopped seeing her legs and started seeing her skill. She went back to Velcora once, and Ben went with her, and they found her family, and her mother cried, and her father tried to apologize, and her sister hugged her and would not let go. And Zara forgave them because holding anger was exhausting. But she did not stay, because that was not her home anymore. Her home was a cramped ship cabin and a human man who snored and left his tools everywhere, and loved her with a fierce completeness that still surprised her. And she had been abandoned once, but she had also been found, and that made all the difference. Sometimes late at night when they were drifting between stars, Ben would hold her and ask if she was happy, and she would say yes and mean it, because happiness was not something she thought she would ever feel again. But humans had a way of making impossible things possible. They grew old together, and the rig needed more repairs, and Ben got gray in his hair, and Zara's scales dulled with age. But none of that mattered because they had each other, and they had built something beautiful from the wreckage of her old life. In the end, love was simple, and it was choosing someone every day and being chosen in return. And it was a human man who saw an abandoned alien girl and decided she was worth saving. And it was that girl, realizing she had always been worth saving and just needed someone to show her how. The universe was big and cold and often cruel, but it also had moments of unexpected grace. And Zara had found hers in the least likely place with the least likely person, and she would not change a single thing because every moment of pain had led her to him, and that was worth everything.